Some lives leave behind speeches. Others leave behind buildings, laws, and headlines. But every so often, someone leaves behind something far more personal. Imagine spending your entire life in the public eye, believing you know everything about one of America's most recognizable politicians. But just days after Lindsey Graham's death, the doors to his estate were opened, and what happened next stunned everyone inside. It wasn't money. It wasn't political secrets. It was something no one expected to find. Something that completely changed the way those closest to him remembered the man behind the headlines. Stay with us until the very end, because the final discovery inside that home tells a story far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. But before we reach that moment, we have to understand the man whose life filled those rooms. Because Lindsey Graham's story was never simple. It was shaped by loss, duty, ambition, controversy, friendship, and an unwavering belief that serving his country was worth almost every sacrifice. Lindsey Olin Graham grew up in a working-class family that owned and operated a small restaurant and bar. Life changed dramatically when tragedy struck in his early 20s. Within roughly 15 months, both of his parents died, leaving Graham to become the legal guardian of his younger sister, Darlene, while he was still completing college. That responsibility became one of the defining moments of his life and remained central to how many people closest to him understood his character. He graduated from the University of South Carolina before earning a law degree from its School of Law. Soon afterward, he entered military service, joining the United States Air Force as a judge advocate. Over the years, he continued serving in the Air Force Reserve and later the Air National Guard, eventually retiring with the rank of colonel after decades of military legal service. That military experience shaped much of his political philosophy. Questions of national security, defense, and foreign policy would remain at the center of nearly everything he did. His political career began in the South Carolina House of Representatives before he successfully ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in 1994. 8 years later, South Carolina voters elected him to the United States Senate. He would remain there for more than 2 decades. Throughout those years, Graham became one of the most recognizable Republicans in Washington. Sometimes he worked across party lines. Other times he became one of the loudest voices in partisan debates. Whether admired or criticized, few questioned his willingness to speak directly. He earned a reputation as a foreign policy hawk, advocating for a strong American military, close relationships with U.S. allies, and an assertive role for the United States on the world stage. Ukraine, Israel, NATO, and sanctions against hostile governments became recurring priorities during the later years of his Senate career. His relationship with Donald Trump became one of the defining political stories of the past decade. Initially one of Trump's harshest Republican critics during the 2016 presidential campaign, Graham later became one of his closest allies in Congress. Their political partnership influenced judicial appointments, foreign policy, and major legislative battles, while also surprising many observers who remembered their earlier disagreements. Friends often described Graham as intensely loyal. Opponents frequently called him unpredictable. Colleagues from both political parties noted that behind closed doors, he often maintained friendships that survived fierce public disagreements. His closest personal relationship remained with his sister Darlene, whom he had helped raise after their parents' deaths. That bond continued throughout his life and became especially visible after his passing. Even as political battles intensified in Washington, Graham rarely slowed down. In 2026, he was once again campaigning for another Senate term after winning the Republican primary in South Carolina. His schedule remained demanding. Meetings, campaign events, committee work, international travel, television appearances. The pace looked exhausting even for someone decades younger. Only days before his death, Graham traveled to Ukraine, where he met with Ukrainian leaders and continued advocating for stronger American support and additional sanctions against Russia. The trip reflected the issue that had become one of his signature causes during his final years in office. After returning to Washington, he was expected to appear on NBC's Meet the Press. The interview never happened. Instead, events took a sudden and devastating turn. Late on Saturday evening, July 11, 2026, Lindsey Graham died in Washington, D.C., at the age of 71. His office initially announced that he had passed away following what it described as a brief and sudden illness, while asking the public to respect the family's privacy during an extraordinarily difficult time. The following day, additional information was released. According to preliminary findings from the District of Columbia Medical Examiner, Graham died from an aortic dissection caused by arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease. An aortic dissection occurs when a tear develops in the inner layer of the body's main artery, creating a life-threatening medical emergency. Public reporting indicated that emergency responders had been called to his Washington residence after a medical emergency, but despite those efforts, he could not be saved. There had been no widely reported announcement that Graham was suffering from a terminal illness before his death. His public schedule remained active until the final days of his life, making the news especially shocking to colleagues and the public alike. Following his death, medical experts noted that an aortic dissection can occur suddenly and is often fatal if not treated immediately. Tributes poured in almost immediately. President Donald Trump praised Graham as one of the greatest senators he had known while dismissing speculation that foul play had been involved. Leaders from both political parties recognized Graham's decades of public service, even when they disagreed with his positions. International figures, including leaders who had worked closely with him on foreign policy, also expressed condolences. His office thanked supporters for their prayers and requested privacy for the family as they mourned. Meanwhile, social media filled with memories from former staff members, military colleagues, political allies, and longtime friends who recalled his humor, determination, and relentless work ethic. In South Carolina, flags were lowered. In Washington, lawmakers reflected on more than 3 decades of congressional service. For many Americans, regardless of politics, Lindsey Graham had become one of those familiar faces who seemed permanently woven into the fabric of national life. And then, almost overnight, he was gone. The public believed the story had reached its conclusion. A respected senator had died unexpectedly. Tributes had been delivered. Official statements had been released. The nation began remembering his public legacy. But no one imagined that what would happen inside his home just days later would leave everyone speechless. The days following Lindsey Graham's funeral were marked by a quiet that stood in sharp contrast to the constant pace of his life. For decades, his schedule had been measured by committee hearings, campaign stops, television interviews, and flights between Washington and South Carolina. His phone rarely stopped ringing. Staff members were accustomed to last-minute meetings and long nights at the Capitol. Now, the calendar had stopped. The official statements had been released. The tributes had filled television screens. Flags had flown at half-staff. Colleagues from both parties had spoken about his service, his determination, and his willingness to defend positions that were often controversial. Supporters remembered a loyal conservative voice. Critics acknowledged a politician who never shied away from difficult debates. Outside, life continued. Inside his home, however, time seemed frozen. Several days after his passing, the legal process surrounding Lindsey Graham's estate quietly began. As with many longtime public officials, the responsibility fell to the individuals entrusted with carrying out his final legal affairs. Attorneys, estate representatives, and those responsible for administering his property gathered to begin the careful work of documenting everything inside the residence. Public reports have confirmed that Graham never married and had no children, meaning responsibility for settling his estate rested with those designated through his legal arrangements rather than a spouse or direct descendants. No television cameras followed them through the front door. No reporters stood in the hallway. Everything happened away from public view. The atmosphere was subdued. Every room reflected the life of someone who had spent nearly half a century in public service. The first impression wasn't one of luxury. It was one of history. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with books covering constitutional law, military history, American presidents, foreign affairs, biographies of world leaders, and volumes on the United States Senate. Many appeared heavily used, their pages marked with handwritten notes and folded corners that suggested years of careful reading. Legal pads rested neatly on desks. Pens remained exactly where they had been left. Open folders still contained policy briefings from recent Senate work. Nothing suggested that their owner had expected his life to end so suddenly. Moving from room to room, those present encountered reminders of every chapter of Graham's remarkable career. Framed photographs lined the walls. Some captured formal moments inside the Senate chamber. Others showed meetings with presidents from both political parties. There were photographs taken alongside American service members stationed overseas. Images from visits to military bases. Pictures documenting diplomatic trips that had taken him across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia during years of work on foreign policy and national security. Campaign memorabilia occupied another section of the house. Boxes carefully labeled by election year held banners, buttons, brochures, newspaper clippings, and stacks of campaign signs from races stretching back decades. Each election represented another chapter. Victories, close contests, political battles that had shaped not only South Carolina but national politics. Nearby sat awards recognizing public service, military contributions, and legislative achievements accumulated over many years. None of them appeared displayed for admiration. Most had simply been placed on shelves, almost as though they had become ordinary parts of daily life. One room offered perhaps the most personal glimpse into Lindsey Graham's past. There, among neatly organized storage boxes, were photographs from Central, South Carolina. Black and white family portraits. Images of the restaurant operated by his parents. Pictures taken long before anyone could have imagined he would one day become one of Washington's most recognizable senators. Several photographs included his younger sister, Darlene. To many Americans, Lindsey Graham had always appeared as a seasoned politician. Inside that room, however, visitors were reminded that before the Senate, before national television, before presidential campaigns, there had simply been a young man forced to grow up far sooner than expected. After losing both parents within a little more than a year, Graham had taken responsibility for helping raise his sister while continuing his education. That chapter of his life explained much about the discipline friends often described. The willingness to shoulder responsibility, the reluctance to complain, the habit of placing duty ahead of comfort. Nearby rested carefully preserved military items reflecting his decades of service as an Air Force lawyer and reserve officer. Certificates, challenge coins, military photographs, commemorative plaques presented during various assignments throughout his career. These were not arranged like museum pieces. Instead, they appear to have been kept simply because they mattered personally. As the inventory continued, attorneys methodically recorded every significant item. Documents were examined, personal effects catalogued, financial records secured. Everything followed routine legal procedure. Hour after hour passed. Nothing seemed unexpected. The home reflected exactly what many had anticipated. A disciplined public servant. A career devoted to politics. A lifetime of military service. A man whose professional identity had become inseparable from the institutions he served. One member of the estate team reportedly remarked that the process was moving more smoothly than expected. Most of the major rooms had now been examined. Offices documented. Storage areas checked. Closets opened. Display cabinets photographed. By late afternoon, it seemed little remained to surprise anyone. People began quietly discussing how much work still remained before the property could eventually be closed. Some gathered paperwork. Others carefully boxed personal belongings that would later be distributed according to Graham's estate plan. The emotional weight of the day had settled over everyone. Silence filled the hallways. Only the sound of footsteps echoed through the home. Then, someone noticed something unusual. Near the back of the residence, beyond what appeared to be an ordinary study, stood a section of wall that seemed strangely out of place. The bookshelves surrounding it looked older than the rest of the room. Dust covered the lower panels. One cabinet appeared fixed permanently against the wall. At first, no one paid much attention. Old houses often contain hidden storage spaces. But one of the attorneys noticed faint marks on the hardwood floor. The cabinet had moved before. Very slightly, almost imperceptibly. Curiosity replaced routine. Several people carefully examined the structure. Behind stacks of books and framed documents, they discovered a concealed locking mechanism unlike any other cabinet in the house. There was no obvious key, no label, no entry listed on the home's inventory. For a moment, everyone simply stared. The room fell completely silent. After hours spent believing every meaningful possession had already been accounted for, they had discovered something no inventory had mentioned. A hidden compartment. Whatever rested behind that locked panel had remained unopened throughout Lindsey Graham's years in the house. No one knew when it had last been accessed. No one knew why it had been concealed. And no one in that room could have guessed what they were about to uncover. For several long moments, no one spoke. The hidden cabinet stood in complete silence. An attorney carefully examined the locking mechanism, while another searched through the documents that had already been catalogued. There was no mention of it in the estate records. No inventory listed its existence. No handwritten instructions explained what might be inside. Finally, after several attempts, the old lock gave way with a soft metallic click. The heavy wooden door slowly opened. There was no fortune hidden inside. No secret government files. No sensational political scandal. Instead, there were only a handful of carefully arranged boxes. Each had been wrapped in plain brown paper. Each carried a handwritten label. One simply read, "Family." Another said, "Remember." A third was marked only with a date from decades earlier. Those gathered exchanged quiet glances before lifting the lid from the first box. Inside were faded family photographs. Some had never been framed. Others had been carefully preserved inside protective sleeves. There were pictures of Lindsey as a boy standing outside his parents' restaurant in Central, South Carolina. Another showed him sitting beside his younger sister long before life forced them both to grow up too quickly. Several photographs captured birthdays that looked wonderfully ordinary. Plastic folding chairs, homemade cakes, smiling faces, the kind of moments no newspaper would ever publish. One estate representative quietly remarked that these images revealed a version of Lindsey Graham the public had almost never seen. Not the senator, not the television guest, not the political strategist. Simply a son, a brother, a young man whose life had once revolved around family rather than Washington. The second box contained something even more personal. Letters. Dozens of them. Some were neatly folded. Others had clearly been opened and reread many times over the years. Several were written by friends from his military service. Others appeared to be notes from longtime colleagues thanking him for private acts of kindness that had never reached the public. One described how Graham had quietly helped the family of a deployed service member. Another thanked him for attending the funeral of a friend without informing the press. There were no headlines about those moments. No television cameras. Only gratitude written in ink. The room grew even quieter. The third box held objects that seemed insignificant at first glance. A worn wristwatch. A pair of reading glasses. An old fountain pen. Several campaign buttons from his first congressional race. A pocket constitution with pages softened by years of use. A small American flag, neatly folded. Nothing carried great financial value. Yet every item seemed to represent a different chapter of a life measured not by possessions, but by experiences. Tucked beneath those keepsakes rested a weathered notebook. Its leather cover showed years of use. The pages inside were filled with handwritten reflections. No dates. No formal journal entries. Just scattered thoughts written during quiet moments. The estate representatives understood immediately that these writings belonged to Lindsey Graham alone. Out of respect, they chose not to read every page. But among the entries was one loose sheet that had become separated from the notebook. Unlike the others, it appeared complete. At the top, in neat handwriting. If you're reading this, it means time has done what time always does. It moves forward, whether we're ready or not. People may remember elections, speeches, victories, or mistakes. They'll argue over decisions long after I'm gone. That's the nature of public life. But I hope the people who truly knew me remember something simpler. Remember the little restaurant where my parents worked every day. Remember my sister, who taught me that family isn't measured by numbers but by commitment. Remember every soldier who wore our country's uniform with quiet courage. Remember that disagreement doesn't have to erase respect. None of us leaves this world with perfect answers. We simply try to leave it a little stronger than we found it. If I succeeded, wonderful. If I failed, I hope someone else continues the work. Take care of each other. Everything else eventually becomes history. When the final line was read aloud, no one in the room immediately spoke. Not because the words were extraordinary, but because they sounded remarkably human. They reflected the complicated life of someone who had spent decades under constant public scrutiny. Someone praised by millions, criticized by millions. Yet, in the privacy of this imagined farewell, none of those political battles seemed to matter anymore. Another small wooden box remained unopened. Inside rested childhood mementos. A restaurant menu believed to resemble those once used by his parents. A faded school ribbon. An old baseball. A church program. Small reminders that every public figure begins life as an ordinary child with ordinary dreams. One photograph attracted everyone's attention. It showed Lindsey and his parents standing together outside the family restaurant. The edges had become worn from handling. On the back, someone had written years earlier, "Home is never really a place. It's the people who teach you who you are." No signature appeared beneath the words. Perhaps it had been written by a parent. Perhaps by Lindsey himself. As evening sunlight entered through the study windows, the estate representatives carefully returned every item to its place. Nothing was treated as treasure because of its monetary value. Instead, each object had become a reminder that behind every public career exists a private life few people ever witness. The speeches eventually end. Campaigns become history. News headlines disappear. Political victories are replaced by new elections. Even the loudest public debates slowly fade. What remains are quieter things. Photographs, letters, memories. The people who shared life's hardest moments. The kindness offered when no cameras were watching. The promises kept. The sacrifices made. Outside, the world continued discussing Lindsey Graham's political legacy. Historians would spend years debating his policies, his alliances, and his place in American history. Those conversations would continue long after everyone gathered inside that house had gone home. But in this imagined ending, the greatest discovery inside the estate was never a hidden fortune or a shocking secret. It was the reminder that every public life contains a private story. One that cannot be measured by election victories, television appearances, or headlines. Only by the people whose lives were quietly touched along the way. Perhaps that is the legacy every person hopes to leave behind. Not a larger bank account. Not a longer resume. Not greater fame. But memories that continue to bring comfort after the house has grown silent. Because when the doors finally close, and the applause has long faded, the true measure of a life is found not in what someone owned, but in what they gave away without expecting anything in return. And sometimes, the most meaningful inheritance isn't hidden inside a locked cabinet. It's carried in the hearts of those who remember.